So, Papa, we just thank you for your excitement to reveal yourself. We thank you for your intention to incarnate yourself into our existence. Thank you for the destiny of your word being human life. That you've invested your all, everything you are, into our existence inseparably. Thank you, Papa. We just pray that by your Spirit you would just so reveal and awaken and make yourself known tonight. Why don't each one of you right now just say, here I am, Lord. What no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, what no mind can conceive, you reveal by your Spirit. So we just here for you to reveal yourself. Thank you, Papa. You know, wow. Every day we wake up to a universe we did not create. The rivers that flow, planets that spin, and beautiful creation. And here we are in the midst of all of it, and we are conscious. Wow, we're not just part of this creation. We are able to perceive it. And we are able not only to exist, but to appreciate the existence of all of creation. One wise old church father said, all things exist through him, but he exists through those who are in agreement with him. Isn't that beautiful? All things exist in God. The way in which he said it was, even the unrighteous exists through him, but God exists through those who have come into agreement with him. In other words, when we started looking this morning at how God gave expression to himself, even in all of creation, how every atom still vibrates with the sound of his voice, we can appreciate, even anyone who's lived near nature or been there, you can appreciate, like Psalms 19, day to day pours forth knowledge, night to night pours forth speech. We can sense God, kind of the majesty of God in the mountains. We can sense his Spirit stirring in the movement of the plants and the winds. We can almost sense God waking up within the liveliness of animals. But in man, God becomes conscious, even of himself. Wow. So here we are, we're in a world that, and since time immemorial, mankind have stood in awe, stood in wonder at the beauty of what's all around us. There are moments of indescribable beauty. And there are moments of indescribable pain, and how to make sense of the seeming chaos and the beauty and the contradiction and the love and the pain. How to make sense of all of this has been a constant pursuit of mankind. And I don't know, how many of you have ever worked with photographic software where you can put in a photo in your computer and you can say, okay, I want to apply some artistic effect to this photo, and you choose the effect. Now, it used to be quite slow, because that's one of the things that takes a lot of power from computers, is to render a new picture with a new perspective, a new way of seeing it. But then at the end, it's taken the raw data and it's applied this effect, and it's got the final rendering of a picture. Now, you are the camera that constantly absorbs raw data. And human contemplation is the conscious or unconscious process whereby we continually apply certain effects to the raw data we've been fed to render a picture that makes sense to us. How do I say this differently? Two people can experience the exact same event, but their experience of the event can be dramatically different because we interpret what happens to us. We deconstruct the information, and then we reorder it, and we start reconstructing it, and often we reconstruct it in our language. And so the fact is that none of the events continue. What continues is our memory of what happened. And so to a very large extent, all of us live in the reality of our own illusions. And in that, in that lies the potential for tremendous joy or tremendous sorrow. Because you might have completely misinterpreted what happened to you, or you might have assigned value to some events that never had the value that you assigned to them. And so let me talk a little bit about the relationship between time and language. Let's take time first. Time, what is time? Is life just the sequence of events, in some boring, some not so exciting, some planned, some unplanned? Or is there a way in which they actually connect? Because, what is the past except that which just does not exist anymore? So the past is exactly that. It's something that is no longer in existence. And the future does not exist yet. And so that leads many people to come to the conclusion that the only reality is the present. But how big is the present? Is it today? Is it this hour? Is it, you see, the meal we ate an hour ago, that event, that fellowship is as unreal, as non-existent as what happened 2,000 years ago. The only thing that makes it more real to you is that it's fresher in your memory. But the past is past. And how big is the moment? Is it the hour? Is it the minute? And when you actually start analyzing it, the present is but a movement from a past that no longer exists into a future that does not exist yet. So time by itself is very insubstantial. And in our attempt to make events more lasting, we found a way in which to connect stuff that no longer exists to stuff that doesn't exist yet. And we try and narrative is the way in which we connect events to tell a story that makes sense. Narrative, our stories, is the way in which we attempt to redeem time from its temporal, meaningless existence and give it eternal existence. And that is the very place in which language was born. Mankind experienced events so beautifully significant or so deeply disturbing that we had to find a way in which to preserve this event beyond its fleeting existence. Because the event itself comes and goes. You see, the only place where the past still exists is in your memory. The only place where the future exists is in your anticipation. And the only place in which the present exists is in your awareness. Now, God wants to increase your awareness way beyond a second, way beyond a minute, way beyond a year, way beyond even the lifetime that you can remember, and bring you into an awareness of a reality greater than time itself. And we're going to look at the process of how that happens. But so language became the symbols which we use to describe the reality of the experiences we had, either externally or internally. It's and symbolism, it's this excess of meaning. Mankind, more than any other creature, we are aware that there is meaning beyond the obvious. There is value beyond the surface. Any other animal will have its basic needs met. It will eat, reproduce, sleep, and be comfortable in its environment, and it will just rest until it's hungry again. But mankind will tunnel through mountains. We will send spaceships into wherever we can. We will spend billions on trying to find a theoretical molecule that gives us gravity, which I think they now discovered. But it is amazing that we are aware of value and meaning beyond the obvious. And this is where our language starts playing such an important part, because they could teach some of the great apes a lot of words. I think there's some of them that have learned more than 1,000 words, that they know the meaning. APPLE is that little red fruit over there. But none of them could be taught the meaning of "you are the apple of my eye." You see, there's an excess of meaning in human contemplation, understanding, in our reflective nature and in our language, which is unique to our ability to symbolize what is meant. Now, we start off with describing an event, a real experience with symbolic language. But the further and further away we move from the actual event, the more our language and our stories takes on a meaning and a life and a personality of its own. Now, somebody might have evil, for instance, in the first place. When we say, what is evil? Mostly people come up with quite theoretical, quite abstract thinking about what evil is. But evil in the first place is not experienced as something abstract. It's experienced as a child's life is cut short violently. A friend is murdered. It's something very concrete. Something horrible happens that is so horrible, we describe it as evil. And we preserve the memory of what happened in our stories. But long after the event has passed away, long after our memory of it might have passed away, we pass on our stories to another generation that did not even experience the actual event, but the phantoms and the horrors of what we describe continues to haunt them in our stories. But now the story, the further it gets removed away from its source, the more deceptive it becomes. And so we need to go back to the actual event. So let me get back to time quickly, time and eternity, and then how it relates to language. You know, when something that has influenced Christian understanding a lot about what eternity and time is the early conversations that Christians had with philosophers, specifically the Hellenistic philosophers. And in Plato's world, in the Hellenistic thinking about time and eternity, the way in which they would describe eternity is they would start with something that's known, for instance, time. And time they would describe as this thing that continually moves, continually changes. You can't put your foot into the same river twice because it's continual, it's temporal, it is unstable, it is dynamic, it's movement. And so after they describe time, they would then describe eternity as the exact opposite of time. So if time is constantly changing, eternity is constantly the same. So they developed this idea of eternal truth, which is constant, unmovable, unchanging. And that greatly influenced the idea about who God is. He was the unchangeable, immovable center around which circling time moves. But the unintended effect of that kind of argument is to, when you think it through, something that is unchanging, unmoving, static, it's also quite boring. It's a great idea abstractly, but when you get down to it, something that and it makes the relationship between time and eternity very contradictory. It's almost like they're the exact opposite of one another. And so when that's your understanding of time and eternity, then religion becomes your hope to be redeemed from time. It becomes the promise of we'll help you escape from this temporal realm into this other realm where everything's constant, where everything's secure and safe and the same. And we think that's a good idea. Man, you'd get bored if that was true. Jesus comes to radically redefine our understanding of eternity by showing us, like we said earlier, for him, John 17:24, eternity, this time before time began, wasn't a place of static sameness. It was a place of dynamic relationship. There was constant interaction, giving, the flow, the movement. And so if you see eternity not as a static place but as dynamic movement, then the relationship with time becomes much more positive, because now time is the created equivalent of the uncreated movements within God. Then suddenly God's eternity is not some otherworldly thing in another dimension, but God's eternity is his faithfulness throughout time. That God moves quicker than time, and it's exactly in that his eternity lies, that time will never exhaust him. But he's the one constantly moving. He's the one spinning the atoms. He's the one connecting the molecules. He's the one active within this world. And so eternity is not something somewhere else, some other time, some other place. But eternity is discovering the value of this place and this time. Nice. And this moment. And that's why when Jesus started speaking about time, in the very few places where he actually berated normally religious leaders, but he said, you are so clever in predicting the weather of tomorrow, but you fail to see the significance of this moment. This moment. We're so busy thinking, what's God going to do? Like in John 5:36, Jesus, God incarnate, comes and stands in front of people reading their Bibles. And he says, you've got your heads stuck in your Bible so deep, because in them you think you will find life, that you don't see life himself. God himself standing in front of you and saying, hey, this is the moment. This is the time. His message was so radical. Change your thinking. The kingdom of God is here. If anyone had to, summarize the message of Jesus over and over, it is repent, think differently. God's kingdom is here. God's kingdom is now. I'm not coming here with a promise for you to escape life. I come to you with the reality of how to enjoy life right here and right now. I'm coming to give you a language to realize that I am able to change. See, we can never, in our old understanding of time, you can't go back and change anything that happened.
It's true.
But if the past only exists in your memory, and if you've maybe misinterpreted events, then the God who's got a completely different perspective, who comes to you with an alternative memory, can do what you never have done. He can actually change your past, because he can help you remember it differently. And so he doesn't just rob evil of having an opportunity in your future. He doesn't just rob evil of its claim on your present life. He even robs evil of its claim on your past. He's the Redeemer. And so 2 Timothy 1 verse 9 that says, this God who gave us grace even before time began. You see, there's one event in your past that really still exists. Because verse 10 says, Jesus, the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, was the appearing of an event that verse 9 says happened before time began. So this is not an event like any other event that is bound up in a time that is temporal, that disappears. This is an event that happened before time began, that just appeared within our history. But this event really still exists, and this is the event in which God comes to declare to you what really happened to you. Something happened to you that is more valid than any other memory you have of your past. And that is the event in which God included you in his life, in his death and in his resurrection. To come and tell you that, oh man, there's so much to that. That's the only event that still exists. The event in which God came to identify with you so deeply, so intimately. The event in which God became everything you are, so that you can be everything he is. The event in which God entered your hell, to demonstrate to you that I will rather go to hell than live without you. I'd rather join you in your torment than abandon you. But I identify with you to that level, so that I can tell you now that I've become everything that you are. You do not have to stay here. There's a resurrection that follows the cross. There's a declaration that says evil does not have the last say in your life. This story is not over until I help you retell it. You see, God doesn't just come and ignore your story. If God came from the outside and He said, you know what, I know you had a tough time, you had a tough life. Oh yeah, I saw what that person, I also saw what you did to that person. But I've got a good idea. Let's forget about all of that and live a happy life ever after. No, with a God like that, you can legitimately argue and say, no, I don't think you understand. I don't think you understand the depth of the anguish, the depth of the pain, the depth of the injustice I've suffered, or even what might be worse, the injustice that I've caused others. But this God, you see, the incarnation is not the first time that God experienced what it's like to be human. The incarnation is just His visible demonstration within our time and history that He is the God who has always been one with His creation. And nothing has ever happened to any person that He has not experienced with them, because in Him all things consist. And so in His life and death He comes to recapitulate, He comes to relive human history, a history of injustice, a history of false accusation, a history of unjust suffering. But He goes through it all. He, instead of coming and enforcing His justice upon this world, He comes and He says, I will rather suffer your injustice than enforce your kind of justice upon you. I will rather identify with the victim and make sure that you understand that I see things from your point of view. And He enters into human suffering. He enters our hell. I mean, when Jesus upon that cross says, my God, why have you forsaken me? He wasn't just reciting a psalm. Of course, it comes from Psalms 22, but in the whole context of the story, Jesus, as fully human, experienced everything we experience. And so this is the moment in which God Himself experiences what it's like to be God forsaken. This is the moment in which the immortal God faces death. This is the moment in which He becomes everything we are, even to the extent that He assumes our doubt, so that we might become partakers of His faith. You see, this is what the first church fathers like Athanasius said. They didn't have all these ideas that we've developed thousands of years later, that salvation is some legal transaction between God and the individual. Their idea of salvation, the way in which he expressed it, is God's method of salvation is He becomes what He wants to save, and only that which He assumes He heals. That's why He doesn't heal you by waving a magic wand, spraying holy water, doing this or that. No, the way in which He heals you is by taking your wounds, bearing your stripes, becoming you. And so when the Word becomes flesh, this is where God comes to demonstrate to what extent He understands you. He knows you. Not in your holy moments, not in your... The Word made flesh means that God steps into the middle of your mess, into the middle of your dung, into the middle of your greatest confusion. And he comes to demonstrate a God whose peace is so great that he's not at peace because he keeps his distance from you. But his peace has such integrity that he can enter right into the middle of the confrontation and confusion and frustration of your life and bring his peace there.
Come on.
And so on the cross, he even assumes our doubt. And he cries out on humanity's behalf what humanity has been thinking. Where is God in the suffering? Where is God in the pain? Where is God in the injustice? And God comes to declare to us, I am right there, suffering it with you. I'm right there, experiencing it with you. I'm the God who won't even abandon you in hell. David says, where can I go to flee from your spirit? If I make my bed in hell, even there you find me. Your arms surround me. And so he enters our deepest moment of frustration, of confusion. He becomes everything we are, so that at this point he can say, now that you know that I understand you better than what you understand yourself, I hope I have your attention. So that you know that when I give you what I want to give you now, I'm not talking out of ignorance. I'm not talking as a person who doesn't quite know where you're at. I'm talking as the God who has never been separate from you. Even when you did not believe in him, he believed in you. Even when you weren't aware of his closeness, his presence, he was right there.
Come on.
And so this God who understands you better than what you understand yourself, who's closer to you than what you are to yourself, this God says, I want to show you a whole new story. The resurrection is this glorious, you see, the death of Christ is the conclusion of our story. We thought our stories are getting more clever and more brilliant and more wonderful, and they've got a trajectory that's always up, and the history of our salvation was so great, and eventually God comes and he says, you got it so right, I just want to come and show you how right you've been. No, the whole history of mankind's encounters with God has been a projection of our own fears and doubts about who he is. And Jesus brings all our projections of who he is, all our stories of who God is and who we are, to a final end. And he says, all these stories, this is a dead-end story. But I want to start this story all over again. You see, God's goodness doesn't consist in his ability to prevent evil. If God's goodness was measured by his ability to prevent evil, we've got to seriously doubt his goodness. Because there's a lot of evil stuff happening that God does not prevent. It happens. There's murders, there's rapes, there's wars, there's injustices that we can't even describe that's happening. And God's not preventing them. But God comes to demonstrate in the person of Jesus that his goodness does not consist in his ability to prevent evil. His goodness consists in his ability to continually create new opportunities to live, to laugh, and to love in spite of evil. He's the God whose resurrection says even the greatest evil is not the end of this story. Even the greatest misfortune is not the end. He's the God of infinite possibilities. It says there is joy, there is adventure, there is laughter, there is love in your future. Don't bind and limit your future to a memory of a fallen past. He comes to liberate your moment. He comes to transform your memories and say, even in the midst of that, I want you to now see that I was with you in that. I want you now to see that your moment doesn't have to be the sum total of the frustrations and disappointments and pains of the past. Your moment can be the overwhelming sense of gratitude of a God who's always been with you in the midst of it all. And now my future is in the hands of a God who makes all things new, in the God of infinite possibilities. Glory. Glory. It's fun. Let's just be aware of this moment. Woo! Papa.
You're amazing. Hallelujah.
And so God's excited about your life. Because you are God's opportunity to live, to laugh, to love.
Nice.
He's so excited about your life because he doesn't see you as some separate extension or animal that he needs to control from a distance. No, God sees your existence as an opportunity for him to exist in this world. He sees, that's why he's so committed to your freedom. Because your freedom equals his freedom. That's why he so wants to liberate us from these limitations and these frustrations. God's not interested to occupy some secret space somewhere in you. And from time to time whisper a nice word of encouragement or direction. He doesn't want to live in you. He wants to live through you. You are the being he designed through which he wants to experience this world and through which he wants this world to experience him.
Nice.
The secret of your most innermost being is God himself. He's the mystery that makes you you. It is his desire that forms who you really are. So when we come face to face, once again with the God who desires us, all the other desires that we've allowed to form us and to mold us and direct us, suddenly just dissolves in the presence of the God who desires us as his companions, as the ones who can intertwine with himself. And as reflective beings, we suddenly discover ourselves again. In the face of Christ, 2 Corinthians 3:18, we behold him as in a mirror. Now, years ago, I had such a problem with that scripture because I grasped something in it. And I remember having struggles in my life and in my thoughts, and I would go to the Lord and I'd say, Lord, please, how do I get rid of this battle and this struggle or whatever? And the Lord would say, well, go to the mirror. See who you really are in my face. And And I didn't want to hear that. And I'd go and I'd come back again and say, Lord, this is such a... What I wanted to hear is say, oh, Andre, sorry, this is such a unique problem. I'm going to give you 3 steps of how to overcome this. But every time I prayed, all I heard the Lord say is, see yourself in my face. And I would argue, I'd say, God, Jesus, you say I must behold Jesus as in a mirror. I mean, Jesus is perfect. Jesus is God incarnated. Jesus never sinned. Jesus never... How can I look at him as in a mirror? Maybe, I can understand that maybe after decades of work, maybe after centuries in heaven, I would resemble something like Jesus. I can see that maybe one day that would be me. And God just replied and said, Andre, this is a mirror. A mirror doesn't show you the future.
Wow.
Neither does it show you the past. This shows you the reality of what I know to be true about you right now. You keep on looking. You keep on looking until one of us changes our minds. And so I would look, behold Jesus. And how insightful, obviously, of the God who made us as creatures that reflect, to divert our focus onto the one who's the blueprint of our design, the Son of Man. And, man. You see, often when we start with our philosophies about God, we start with big words like, knowledge is good, God must be omniscient. Power can be good in the hands of the right one, so he must be omnipotent. So we start with our big theological words, the omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent one. And those things are true in certain contexts, but we get so lost in our abstract theories about him, and we forget that when God wanted to reveal himself, he didn't come to impress us with his omniscience or his omnipresence or his omnipotence. Jesus is in one place at one time. He's not omnipresent. Jesus, Luke tells us, had to grow in wisdom and knowledge. He's not omniscient. Jesus, it's at one place says there he could not do many mighty works because of their unbelief. So that's a strange kind of omnipotence. So Jesus, the exact representation of God, comes to wreck all our best ideas about who God is.
Thank you, Jesus.
How is it possible for God to become human and remain fully God?
Hallelujah.
I think God starts giving us insight into that, and I'm closing with this in 1 Corinthians 13 when he says, you know, if I have all the faith with which to move mountains. You know, Paul, I know you guys are very impressed with omnipotence and power. But you know, if I had all of that, but I had not love, I would be nothing. And if I could speak the languages of all the angels and I knew all things. In other words, Paul, if I was omniscient, but I had not love, I'm nothing. In other words, Paul, I want you to understand that it is not my knowledge that makes me me. It's not my power that makes me me. See, the one quality that makes God God is love. And this is why God could become human and not be reduced in his divinity, because the human existence is in no way a limitation for the love of God to be displayed. And that's why whenever you love, God is being himself in you.
Nice.
whenever you love, God is being Himself in you. And I can guarantee you, no matter where you find yourself, what circumstances, what situation you find yourself in, you don't have to do incredible, spectacular works, have amazing opportunities. I guarantee you, wherever you find yourself, you have an opportunity to love.
Yes.
And so God has an opportunity to be free in you. He's excited about your life. See, love is often even experienced and recognized more clearly in the very contradiction, in the very confrontation that seems to make it impossible. It's often the contrast that makes things clearer. And so it's in the midst of chaos that your life becomes so meaningful. Because here your life happens in the midst of chaos. See, this is how resurrection life is not the ability to avoid death.
Wow.
Resurrection life is God's declaration. Evil, give me your best shot.
Wow.
Do your best. And when you've exhausted yourself, I'll just get up again and say, the story has just begun. And in the place where evil was most real, it was completely defeated.
Hallelujah.
It was forever placed in our past. God's excited about your story, about your life. And He comes to introduce us to a language in the Word made flesh. A language with which we can delve for eternal value, even within the temporal events of our lives. Because eternity and time are not opposites. Eternity is recognizing the value of the temporal. There is such value in your life right here, right now. However you want to think of the eternity after this life, what every theologian will confirm to you is to think of it as just a continuation of time would be a complete mistake. You see, this life is the only time you have. Ooh, man. He wants to live, love, laugh through you right here, right now, and help you discover the beauty of who He is, not in some abstract theory, but in the person right next to you, in the person in the mirror, in your friends and your family, even those who do not recognize their value themselves. He wants to open your eyes, just like He could see you clearly when you were dead in your trespasses and sins. When you were at your ugliest, He embraced you because He knew that is not the deepest truth about you. The deepest truth is love never loses hope that the DNA of God will blossom in the right atmosphere. And so the gospel comes to just create the atmosphere in which the dormancy is broken. You know, I'm closing with this example. Thank you, Miriam. They found seed in the tomb of a pharaoh, grain seed, and it was entombed there for thousands of years. And they had no hope that this would actually germinate, but they planted the seed, and it germinated.
Wow.
And so what they discovered is that, the deaf entombed, in which it was entombed, could not overcome the life concealed within that seed. And it doesn't matter with how much dirt and death and confusion a human being entombs themselves in. You bring them into the atmosphere of love, of value, and the dormancy is broken. There is something that resonates within us, that recognizes here's one who is like me. And it awakens life. A lost coin never loses its value. You see, these things that we spoke about tonight, it's not true because you believe it. You believe it because it's true. And that means it is true even for those who do not believe it. It is true even for the lost, because you cannot be lost unless you belong. And so this so liberates us to see value in every person. This is what Paul could say in 2 Corinthians 5, from now on I cannot look at any man from a human point of view, because something redefined my vision of who man is in the event of Christ Jesus. I came to recognize a deeper reality, to recognize what they do not even recognize. And so even with unbelievers, I mean, when I meet a Muslim man with all the clothes of all the signs of being a Muslim, my first thought is not, you believe something different from me, so you are not as valuable as the people in my club. Our first thought should be, you are valuable.
Yeah.
You are loved.
Good. Good.
And there's nothing that will open up any other person more to what you believe than the knowledge that you value them. And I don't value them with an agenda. I don't value them with the hidden agenda of, I'm going to be nice to you until I can convert you. And when I bring you to that choice and you don't make the right choice, then I'm no longer going to value you. No, I value you because you are genuinely valuable. And I hope I can bring you to see how valuable you are and to see what I see. And it's so easy if what you see causes you to genuinely value another person, to persuade them of what you see. But we can no longer look at any man and see anything less than God's desire to live and move and have his being in this world.